Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Matt. Um, I am hosting the Zoom, and that's just about as far as my gracious hosting skills extend. So we're gonna get right into it. This is another one of the PACSCL What We Learned series Zooms where we can learn from others and learn from each other. So we'll have three 10 to 15-minute presentations, and then there'll be a Q&A at the end. But if you want to, as questions arise to you, if you want to dump them in the chat, we can log them and then come back to them later, whatever works for you. Okay, so I think let's get going. So first we have Michael Norris from Carpenters Hall.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Although I guess the reason's kind of grim, but happy to be here to share. I'm literally going to share my screen right now. Hopefully this works. Are folks seeing this?
Yep, that looks good.
Great. Excellent. All right. Well, let's just dive in. So I'm Michael Norris from Carpenters Hall. And of course, now my page down button is deciding not to work. It's just slow. Okay, here we go. Sorry. This is Carpenters Hall, which I hope many of you are familiar with. It is a National Historic Landmark in Old City. We are geographically located within the bounds of Independence National Historical Park, but we are privately owned and operated by the Carpenters Company of Philadelphia, which was founded in 1724 as a trade guild for master builders, and still exists today as a professional association of architects, contractors, and engineers. The building became historically significant when we hosted the First Continental Congress in the fall of 1774. And that's when folks like George Washington and John Adams and Patrick Henry and many others met here to kind of lay the groundwork for the colonial coalition that ultimately achieved independence in the revolution. So we have obviously a historic building, which we kind of consider to be our most significant artifact, but we also have lots of other interesting collections and things. We have a historic library on our second floor. If any of you have not been to that library, I would love to show it to you. So please feel free to reach out to me. We also have various paper archives relating to the history of the company, a wonderful furniture collection, and other kinds of objects. What you're seeing in the lower right are original leather fire buckets that were made for Carpenters Hall in the 1780s. And of course, our main mission is to preserve the building and preserve our collections, and open the site for public visitation and interpretation. We've been doing that since 1857. That's when Carpenters Hall opened as a museum and a historic site. And this year, of course, is momentous to us in many ways. It's the 300th anniversary of the company itself. And it's the 250th anniversary of the First Continental Congress. So we had conducted an exterior preservation project throughout most of 2022. You're seeing a couple of images of that here, which included a full excavation of our original rubble foundation and a full sort of facelift, I guess, on the exterior of the building. That work was completed in about the middle of December of 2022. Then this happened, right? So on Christmas Eve 2022, someone broke into the building, into the basement specifically, which is what you're seeing here, and set the basement on fire, right? So it was clearly a deliberate act of vandalism and arson. The fire was detected by a nearby park ranger. It was about 10 p.m. at night, so of course no one was around, but it was detected early and created, as you can see, quite a mess of the contents and archives that we were at that time storing in the basement. Just a few fun examples, since Beth said she wanted to see scary pictures of things that were damaged, basically beyond repair in the fire. That included lots of stuff that wasn't too important, sort of supplies and inventory for our gift shop, but it did include lots of archives, archival material related to the history of the company, mostly from the 20th century, so relatively new material for us. Fortunately, in light of this incident, we have been maintaining our oldest archives from the 18th and 19th century, actually at APS in their archives. So all of that material was and remains offsite from the building, but our more contemporary stuff was in the basement, and meant much of that was lost and damaged. We had some physical damage to the building itself. Fortunately, nothing structural. This is a 19th century tile floor that's in the main hall that was damaged and has, of course, since been repaired. So for us, it wasn't just stuff; it was part of the building itself. But as I said, there was no structural damage to the actual building. So that was sort of a huge relief for us. We immediately contracted with Belfour to do the remediation. They were unfortunately not allowed on site for about 4 days because of the arson investigation. ATF took over the site and did all of their sort of investigation and evidence pulling, and we were not allowed to be on the premises for about 4 days, which meant that a lot of the stuff that you saw in the earlier picture, sat there soaking wet for days longer than it really should have. But once Belfour was allowed in, many boxes, which you can see in this photo on the table and in the back of the photo, were picked up from the site by Belfour and removed out to their facility out in Exton. So ultimately, what happened with this material after being sorted really by us, and you can see Carol Smith here in the front of this picture, who some of you may know as an archivist in the city. We really had to sort through everything to determine if it was salvageable or beyond repair, or even necessary to save. And we ultimately kind of created three categories of those documents. Many of them were cleaned by Belfour and returned to us. Many of them were digitized also by Belfour, so we now have digital versions of those things. And the stuff that has come back to us in physical form is temporarily being housed at APS while we continue to sort of figure out how we're going to reconfigure and manage archival storage in our basement. So there was also a full remediation inside the building. You're seeing here just a quick shot of some of the cleaning and repainting that had to happen. The fire was contained to the basement, but there was soot and smoke damage literally the whole way up to the inside of the attic on the 3rd floor. So So everything had to be cleaned and repainted. That sort of ironically turned out to be a bonus for our reopening, because the preservation project that we had closed for, really was on the exterior of the building, and we hadn't planned to do a whole lot to the inside of the building. But the fire, sort of made that change the change the script on that. We had to clean everything inside too. So when we did finally reopen, the building looked pretty good inside and out. So we did reopen the hall last summer on July 3rd, to be exact. So that was about 5 months later than we had originally planned after the preservation project. So it was a pretty Herculean effort to get reopened after the damage from the fire. The total cost of the damage was about $1.5 million. Most of that, of course, was paid for, covered by insurance. But it did, create a little bit of we lost some momentum in terms of reopening and kind of getting ready for our anniversary this year. But we have been, reopened since July, as I said, and things are sort of relatively back to normal. We did sort of a full assessment of our security protocols and systems. We added cameras that did not exist before, both inside and outside the building, and have accepted, or I don't know, I sort of graciously am thankful that even though we had a fire, which was horrible, we were able to sort of learn our lesson and do some improvements, as opposed to the alternative, which is a little terrifying to think about. So this last slide is just a little summary of what I took away from our experience. I have become a fierce advocate for sprinklers in historic sites, which I know not everyone necessarily agrees with. But when I showed up here on Christmas morning, the fire marshal told me that if we had not had sprinklers and had they not gone off, the building would be a pile of rubble. So that was kind of all I needed to hear to become a champion for sprinklers. So obviously, folks should invest in waterproof archival storage and fireproof storage. Really make sure your security systems are in place, and that you have a maintenance plan for smoke detectors. Again, most folks probably have this already covered in any sort of emergency management plan, and we had these things in place too. So I just wanted to reemphasize that doing that kind of planning and thought process before a calamity is a really good thing. We had an insurance adjuster, so I didn't even know what that was until this happened. So I just assumed adjusters worked for insurance companies, and sort of that was it. But we at the sort of insistence of our board, had our own insurance adjuster who managed the process with the other insurance companies. We actually had 4 insurance policies in play in this claim, because we had just gone through the preservation project. There was a claim or a policy covering the general contractor. We have a building policy. We have a collections policy. And in a fun sort of nerdy archival moment, we have a fire insurance policy that was signed with the Philadelphia Contribution Ship in 1773. And that policy is actually still in place. It's the second oldest insurance policy in the city, according to them. And we did actually get a claim on that policy. So 250 years of insurance finally paid off, I guess. So And then the last thing that really happened to us that was quite a shocker was, and I maybe in retrospect I should have been prepared for this, but I kind of wasn't. We had our main property insurance carrier actually refused to renew our policy. We had to find a new carrier, and our premium went up by about 400%. In 1 year. And I found that fairly shocking considering the cause of the fire was not our fault. It was an act of arson and, terrorism essentially. I wasn't expecting for insurance to go up, but it obviously it did significantly. So just another thing to prepare yourself for. So, and I think I'm right under my 15 minutes. So there we go. I think we're doing questions at the end. So I will stop there, and I guess we will pass it off. Let me do that. And I think Janine is up next, yes?
Yep, that's me. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Hang on a second. So, as Michael said, I'm Janine Pollock. I'm the Chief of Special Collections at the Free Library of Philadelphia. And thank you all for coming to this discussion today. So when Beth asked me for a title for this talk, I kind of, just was flippantly saying chronicling disaster. And now hearing Michael's account, I'm wondering, it's a little bit hyperbolic, but you be the judge. And also, as things unfold in our special collections and especially the rare book department at the Free Library of Philadelphia, we continue to face challenges with water and environment. So that being said, this is the story of a October 2nd, 2022, a major leak was discovered in the Free Library's Dietrich Gallery in the rare book department. Over the course of a night of driving rain, water continued to infiltrate the gallery, where a highly anticipated and highly collaborative exhibition had recently been installed. It's 2 years in the planning. In terms of the discovery, we have 24-hour security walking through the building, and we'll see what the result was in a minute. But the Free Library's special collections have collaborated on many successful projects with PACSCL. Chronicling Resistance had its challenges, but beyond what I'll talk about today, forcing us to stretch as an institution while the world was recovering from a pandemic and we were at a very low point, facing our own racial reckoning and long overdue but tumultuous changes in leadership. It was a ripe environment for learning, and I think we did learn from it. The project evaluation and roadmap for future exhibition work at the Free Library have given us much to consider. But that's a whole other conversation. I'm getting behind in my slides. This is the website for Chronicling Resistance, and just shows a few of examples of the objects that were in the exhibition and the activist curators who participated. So wait a minute. The situation we found ourselves in October of 2022 touches on a more palpable shift we had to carry out as an institution, becoming a borrower of objects. A prospect, I'll admit, that made me anxious from the very beginning. When the project began, we didn't have a standard facilities report. We did have a relatively secure gallery, free and open to the public, but well monitored. Climate controlled relatively, but it also had a history of leaking. As it happens, roof work had been scheduled around the time of the installation. Just the complexities of working in a city institution governed by the budgetary uh, you know uncertainties. Um, but we had been lobbying for that since about the beginning. We had these little leaks occur since the gallery was opened in 2014. So in an overabundance of caution, a phrase that we began to use very frequently, we notified lenders, both institutional and private, of the potential risks of this roofing project. And these cautions had to do with air quality and vibrations. The October 2nd leak, in my opinion, resulted from brick pointing that was adjacent to the gallery. A hard rain had come, and you see, I'm talking about masonry work and the window well. And then the last point is existing roofing material will be removed and replaced each day. But these were like mutually exclusive because the window work, in the window well, this brick pointing, the mortar was removed and it was not replaced until the next day. And between that time, a hard rain came and the gallery leaked as it never did before, and it was a complete washout. The floor, you could see that it's pretty wet. We have our security. They would, in these situations, they might like take a cover and cover up the cases. In this situation, they actually had to move the cases out of the path of the water, which is coming from above. And just, some of the things we put in place to catch the water. So we immediately emailed and so then I made the decision in consultation with my staff and superiors to deinstall the exhibition. Nothing had been damaged, but just again an abundance of caution and thinking it would be a matter of a week or so. And we immediately emailed all of the lenders. Some had questions, obviously concerns, but all agreed with our proposal to keep the objects in secure storage until it was safe to reinstall. The exhibition wasn't derailed completely, as we had exhibits throughout the building. It was disappointing in the sense that for the most part, the objects in the Dietrich Gallery, they were the ones that were the original objects that like sort of inspired all of this in the rest of the building, and that gave the exhibition such profound meaning. Tours and programming had been planned, and since the exhibition had only been open for a couple of weeks, and some of the curatorial fellows had invited visitors from out of town, it was really some difficult conversations. And but as it turned out, almost immediately, a staff member posted on Facebook that the department was closed because of a leak. This came to the notice of an inquiry reporter who contacted our communications team. And one of the things that I'm grateful for working at a large institution is having a communications team that can help craft a response. But unfortunately, this was the only coverage that I know of Chronicling Resistance in the Inquirer, which is really disappointing, but so it goes. And we also wanted to communicate with staff. Looking back on this email, I kind of buried the lead in the third paragraph. And, but in terms of teams and staff, having the staff of the Rare Book Department, all of the special collections, collection care, property management folks, as well as communication, it's a fortunate situation to be in when something like this happens and there's just an endless amount of work to be done. It's a double-edged sword when there are other priorities, though, as we continue to find out through a number of current capital projects that the wheels of progress move very slowly. It's difficult to decide when to throw a hissy fit, when to break the chain of command, when to be patient. It's important not to damage relationships that are necessary to the functioning of your organization by throwing people under the bus or shaming them, as tempting as that is sometimes. But the most helpful trait in these situations is persistence, just not letting it rest. So fixing the damage to the roof took nearly a month. This is the part of the roof that's over the gallery, and there's this drain that you see in the top of the photograph that would clog, and that, like I said, we have 24/7 security and buildings that do check for this kind of thing, but this roof surface is a vulnerable area as much as that brick pointing was, and so it took all that time to coat this with whatever they were coating it with, seal the bricks, coat them with something, let that cure, coat them again, and then do several water tests where just water sprayed and where, is it coming in? No. Okay, let's, we're ready to rock and roll. So trying to establish that it's watertight as much as any roof can be. And then, of course, repairs had to be made to the interior of the department of the gallery. As the closure dragged on, we thought it made sense to try to extend the exhibition. We had lost about a month. We reopened just, I think, after Thanksgiving. So it was a little over a month, but we had something coming in March. So we asked the lenders for if they would mind extending the exhibition, extending their loans for another month, and I'm happy to say all consented, and we were able to have the exhibition open until the end of January. In addition to being grateful to my colleagues for their hard work and dedication, I'm also grateful to the lenders, the institutional lenders, as well as the activist curators and other private lenders who trusted us with their precious objects, and even when we gave them reason to doubt us. So with that, I will turn it back over to Matt.
Okay, and I'll throw it to Josh from UArts.
All right, thank you. Oops. Share my screen before I open up my presentation. Okay. So I am Josh Roberts. I'm the Assistant Vice President for University Libraries at the University of the Arts. And we had a really large flood in 2017 in the lower level of the library. And we'll look at some good horrifying pictures of that. And then I was sort of thinking about, what did we actually learn from this? And my first thought was that I learned like a whole lot of new things about spreadsheets. It was really just a spreadsheet heavy project, but really I think it was, what sort of stuck with me was we worked with a whole lot of people that we hadn't worked with before, or people that we had worked with before, but worked with them in whole new ways. And that's really sort of was a lot of my takeaway from this. just to orient you, this is Hamilton Hall. It's on Broad Street at the corner of Broad and Pine. It's the oldest building on Broad Street. It's sort of the most recognizable of UArt's buildings. But all of the action of this story sort of takes place directly across Broad Street in Anderson Hall, which is, a little less photogenic. The Greenfield Library is our main library, which takes up space on the first floor mezzanine and in the lower level basement of the building. Here you can sort of see our main area, you can sort of see up to the mezzanine a little bit. This is a couple pictures of the lower level before the flood. It's open stacks, it's a reading room, there's a picture file of like reference illustrations. We had a whole area full of compact shelving that had more open stacks, more all of our sort of bound journals, and then in a locked section of compact shelving, the university archives. So here's another view. It's a library. So then in April of 2017, and in like the wee hours of the morning, between like a Friday night into Saturday morning, an 8-inch water main that breaks an 8-inch water main broke. It's the main that came in and feeds the sprinkler system for the building. That burst, and very quickly the building or the basement filled up with like 8 to 10 feet of water. That was bad. It did sort of bad things to the library. Knocked a whole lot of stuff down. Everything sort of floated and then went somewhere and came back down somewhere. Just more, a little more destruction for you. There used to be a wall there that the water just blew that totally out. This is within some of the compact shelving. You can sort of see the compact shelving bowing out in that left picture. That's because all of the, you submerge a book in water, it swells and it's got to go somewhere, and it just pushed all that out. And you can sort of see books arcing off of like book carts or shelves, or where there used to be shelves. So that was, it was a thing. So, the first question was, we had the remediation company on site. The library was not involved in choosing the remediation company. It's just whoever facilities had, but they were there the next morning when I got there. They wanted to know, what do we save? And we didn't have any sort of like disaster plan, but we very quickly figured out like, let's save the archives, everything else, nah. And that went okay. They sent out all of our archives for freeze dried it all. It came back, the materials are in okay condition. You can tell they've been water damaged, but they're readable, they're usable. But the big problem is that all of these sort of archival boxes that they were in kind of disintegrated. So the boxes stayed in the basement, the files went out for freeze drying. What came back is not in its original order. I mean, it's not bad, it's close, but it's, any finding aids or box lists or whatever just don't really describe what we've got anymore. And we're still putting that together. It's been, 7 years, and we're still working through that. But everything else, gone. So that was about a third of our circulating books, all the bound journals. Also, it's where like we had some office space down there. It was not great. Let's see. Yeah, and that was, I was trying to think about if I had any lessons that I learned from that, but not really. We made a lot of choices very quickly, and I don't really regret any of them. Saving the archives was the right thing to do. Everything else, they're just books. We'll live. The other group that I sort of had to deal with immediately was insurance companies. And that was something that I had really never had no experience in. They were also there, the day after the flood, on site, asking us a whole lot of questions. And I was trying to be very helpful and like explain like, you know, what we had lost and, you know, just what we did. And I don't know, I wish one of my first big lesson is that I really wished I had asked just like dumb questions, like, who are you? Like, who do you work for? Like, what's your job? What's your role in all of this? I was so busy trying to be helpful that I'm not entirely sure like who I was talking to. We had, you know, there were claims adjusters from the insurance company. We had our own claims adjusters. It was just very, I don't know. I didn't quite know what we were doing. But similarly, they didn't really know what we did. We spent a lot of time trying to like explain what we had lost. They were, you know, the people we were talking with were not library users, which is fine. You don't have to be a library user, but it, you know, they were, you know, we lost all of our bound periodicals. It took them a long time to figure out like what we meant by that. They were like, so these are books? And we're like, no, they're not really. They're like, you know, issues of magazines, and we put them together into hardback volumes. They're like, oh, great. So how many like issues of magazines did you lose? And we were like, well, we don't know. We can tell you easily like how many volumes we lost, but how many issues is that? So our tech services librarian actually ended up doing some really heroic work to answer that question of like how many issues of magazines were in this, you know, 100 years worth of bound journals that went away. Like we had a full run of the New Yorker that like how many issues is that? But yeah, that was really a challenge. We really spent a lot of time answering questions like that we had a hard time answering because I'm not sure they were quite asking the right questions. And the other thing that really became difficult for us over the months after the flood was we were asked to put together, you know, an estimated replacement value for the collection. And that's just not, I don't know. We had maybe 10 years worth of order records in our ILS, but those were set up to, you know, do library acquisitions and, you know, be able to track annual expenditures. It wasn't really, the data didn't exist in a form that let us really put a value on the collection. We did, I did some serious spreadsheet work and we did some statistical modeling and we did some estimates. But it really never, I don't know. It was a lot of work and I don't think that the insurance company was particularly happy with how we had done that. I really wish we had found somebody who could help us kind of come up with an estimate. Like we made a good faith estimate of the value of the bound serials, but then, you know, this was 2 years after the flood, the insurance company came back and disputed our claim, and they had actually hired a like used serials vendor to like sort of audit and analyze our estimate. And that was, I mean, I didn't know that such a thing existed, but you know, they found a guy. And I really wish that we had had some outside guidance in how to like, in sort of what the insurance company was going to look for in terms of understanding our estimate. It would have been, you know, it would have been upfront costs, but I think in the long term, it would have saved us putting in a lot of work answering questions that weren't quite the right questions. Okay, so the other big group, the last big group that we dealt with was the folks that we actually already knew, like our community. And, you know, I wouldn't have necessarily thought going into this, but our vendors and our sales reps that we deal with all the time were actually really helpful. I mean, obviously, everybody knew that we were about to spend a whole lot of money, but you know, beyond that, they really were like helpful and worked with us. Like our main book vendor is Gobi, and I'm not trying to make this like a Gobi or EBSCO commercial, but they did right by us. They really did some sort of custom procedures that let us do bulk replacements of things that we had lost. It was, we ended up only wanting to replace about 20% of the books that we lost. It was actually a really, really interesting kind of exercise in weeding. And they were able to replace about half of that through just bulk ordering. So all in all, we ended up being able to replace about 10% of the books we lost through like a relatively easy process. I mean, it took 18 months, but it was, it went reasonably well. But then, we're still dealing with the after effects of that. There were large parts of the collection that just, what we have now is nowhere near as complete as what we used to have. And that's just an ongoing process. And it's been sort of surprising that, well, not even surprising, that we've been able to bulk up some of our collections, especially like our entire like art photography collection was destroyed. Those have come in through just like the regular donation process of people contact us and they say like, oh, I've got all these art books, would you like them? Not even necessarily tied to the flood, just people offered them to us. But that sort of, it's a lead into like our community, like in the immediate aftermath, like our community was like deeply distraught. Like our faculty, staff, students were way more upset about this, frankly, than the library staff were. We were like, well, we lost a lot of books, like let's keep moving. But I think the sort of emotional toll was different, but like it was very intense amongst our community. Like the photography department, like the faculty, like were self-organizing to like empty out their personal collections of photo books to give to us, which ended up not happening because what we needed at that moment was like space. We needed space and we needed time to like get our stuff together. And people really, respected that. But I think we could have done better by, if early on we were just like picked somebody and was like, it's your job to talk to our community, like let them know what's going on, keep them up to date, accept their offers of help, steer people's like offers of help in ways that would have been useful to us. Because we ended up, we got like a huge outpouring of, emotional support from our community, but not much material that really ended up helping our sort of still ongoing recovery. And, part of that was timing. The flood happened in April, like right before finals week. By the time we kind of knew, by the time our head stopped spinning, it was summer and, students and faculty had sort of dissipated. And then and we were very, very focused on getting the building reopened for the fall semester. And by the time all of that happened, a lot of the sort of momentum and sense of urgency had like dissipated. And I think if, God forbid this ever happened again, I think engaging with our community more seriously right up front would have been more helpful. So anyway, that's what happened. I'm not real thrilled about it, but we learned a lot.
Okay. Thank you, Michael, Janine, and Josh. Questions from people on the call, or ideas or reflections on your own experience that parallel any of these? Feel free to come off of mute or on screen or put them in the chat.
Josh, I just want to say, your comments about the community and sort of trauma really hit me because I didn't even quite address that. And I think, right, maybe as a staff person and a leader, I just like went into reaction mode and, let's fix this without really thinking time to think about almost like a grieving process, right? So, I mean, there literally in 250 years had never been a fire at Carpenters Hall, right? So it was a big deal.
Mhm.
And I don't know if we fully, or I fully sort of, sort of let that sink in. But I think you're right. It makes a difference, especially for the people you're serving.
Yeah, we were very actively being cared at.
Right.
I also thought it was sort of interesting, Michael, that in your case, your sprinkler system saved the day.
Yeah.
Ours did the opposite.
Right. Yeah. Well,
But still, have sprinklers. We haven't had a
Right.
fire.
Right. So, yes, it certainly did a number on what was in the basement, but the sprinklers. But again, for us, the building is the primary artifact. So that's what we want to save above anything.
We got a question from Ilhan. Josh, you see that about the risk management office?
Yes. So we don't really have we're fairly small, and we don't have something that is just a dedicated risk management. It was kind of split between our facilities department, which at the time consisted largely, that we had an AVP for facilities, and then most of the people below her were, Aramark contractors. So it was between, our facilities department and our finance department and our CIO. So we didn't really have sort of the internal resources, I think, to do this. Or to be sort of like as have people whose job it is to think about risk all the time. We also weren't the only, the library wasn't the only group on campus that had space in the basement. Our central IT department lost a whole lot of network infrastructure. There was also just like, a computer lab. They had some office space, but and then also, all of the mechanicals of like the building's elevator system were destroyed. Like, so it was sort of a large group effort on the recovery. And I just talked about the library, but it really did hit many constituencies.
We got another question from Christina. For those of you who hired an independent insurance adjuster, how did that work out in the end? The insurance has their own, but you had yours, so was it helpful in negotiations when it came down to who was willing to pay out what?
I mean, certainly in our case, it was definitely worth it. We hired our own adjuster pretty quickly into the process, and they were the ones who were talking to all of the other adjusters and investigators, because of course each company also has their own investigator, right? So and Josh, your point about who are you, I definitely felt that at the beginning, because I was like, are you an adjuster, or are you an investigator, which company are you? It was all so chaotic. But all of that went away when we hired an adjuster, because they were the ones who were talking to those folks. And so yes, it costs money, and they sort of take a percentage of the claim. The other thing that was really invaluable for us was, we knew we needed to, just make all of this remediation happen as soon as possible so we could reopen. I mean, initially people were saying, oh, you're not, it's going to take a year, to get all of this back together. And we didn't want to do that, right? So our own adjuster worked with the insurance companies, and they actually advanced, significant amounts of money before the claim was even settled, right? So, because they knew we needed to pay for all this stuff to happen, right, in order for us to reopen, and we couldn't wait 9 months, for the claim, or a year, or whatever, for the claim to be settled. So having all of that be on them was just a huge benefit for us.
Anyone else want to add to that particular, anyone who's had the similar misfortune to get to work with adjusters?
I wish I could actually tell you what the ultimate sort of disposition of the claim was, but because it was, the library was a large part of, but like a larger claim, all that money just ended up in the university, and we were just told, spend the money to recover. Like, we spent a lot of money up front, and I don't actually know overall what I don't know the details of how the claim ended up settling. But yeah, it's the very much like, oh, but you've got to spend all this money right now. We did.
Not a problem. Ironically, I just got a message from our insurance adjuster while I was sitting here on this call. So there must be some little detail that still needs to be resolved.
Yeah, and that was like when our insurance company disputed our replacement value for the cereals. It was several years after the flood, like to the point where we were already like fairly like emotionally distant from it. It was, yeah, that was something.
Another question in the chat. Michael and Josh, the disasters were caused by circumstances you can control. For Janine, the disaster was a result of contractor work. Was the leakage problem anticipated by the contractor or facilities manager?
I will say that, like, one of the things that when I first found out there was roof work being done, I started to ask those questions. And I think, like, sort of the problem solving, I think that the property management folks at the library feel like they are solving this problem for you, and isn't it great the roof work is being done? And when you start to ask questions about like what exactly that means for the facility, it's makes them sort of a little resentful that you're asking those questions. So it's a difficult spot to be in, like being ungrateful, like we're getting this work done. But I think it's incumbent upon us as professionals to understand those risks. And I feel like, a little silly that I didn't think of the brick pointing, having had that done on my own house, and the impact of the having no mortar in between bricks. So it was not anticipated, I don't think. But it made me think, this talk of insurance made me think of a previous project where we had put into the contract somehow, I don't even know how we did it, that if there were damages caused by the contractor, that they would pay for it. And there was a leak, and some books were damaged, and they paid the bills. The construction management company, I think. I don't think it even went to insurance.
And we have a sort of comment and question farther up in the chat from Celia, saying the rising insurance costs are disturbing. I've been hearing so much about this on the news for residential homeowner insurance, and wondering if this is another climate change impact or cost for libraries. Any thoughts on the gloomy future of it all from any of you, or anyone else on the call?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say yes, that it's the costs are exorbitant and it's impossible to really ensure our collections adequately at some institutions. So it's, tempting to, at that point, to cut corners, which we tend to do.
And I'm wondering something that's come up a couple times. Has anyone else on the call had satisfactory experience working with people to estimate value for the purpose of insurance? I know that this is something that comes up all the time, especially with irreplaceable, unique items. Has anyone had a decent experience working with someone?
I mean, for me, not in terms of for like this type of situation, but I think that because of the value of some of our collections, we have auction houses like to work with us and want to evaluate our stuff, maybe hoping that we will someday sell it. So that's been, in that sense, we have access to the folks who would know, and this is like sort of for higher end collections and objects. And, which is helpful when it comes to, you're lending something and you want, to have it adequately insured. So it is, I think important to establish a relationship with, whether it's local or on a national or international level, depending on your collection, just to have, an open relationship and establish that now rather than waiting until the disaster happens.
Yeah, Matt, we didn't have this in the cost estimation space, but we did have a little sort of issue with with Belfour, the remediation company, because they were recommending that the books in our library, which is on the second floor, be removed and cleaned professionally. And our archivist Carol did not agree with that recommendation. So we actually ended up engaging with the Conservation Center. I don't know if anyone from the Conservation Center is on this call, but to sort of get a kind of second opinion on what was the best course of action for those books, which were, again, on the second floor. They weren't in the basement. There was evidence of a tiny bit of smoke in that room, and what was their recommendation for what to do with that. So their recommendation was ultimately to not remove them and to clean them on site. And we used that to, persuade Belfour that was not something we should do.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We're at 4 o'clock. So thanks everyone for participating. Josh, Janine, and Michael, thank you for sharing. And I'm presuming all three of you would be happy to take any questions from anyone after the fact. So if you can if you can Google people, you can track them down, I'm sure. We're all information professionals after all. So thanks everyone, and that's it. Oh,
Yeah,
wait,
thanks
okay,
everyone.
So, yeah, if anyone else wants to share anything else in the chat as a parting shot, that will work too. But thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.